So thanks for turning up. My name is Nick Palmer. I work for a Cellbyte, right? And but I've worked in games forever. We're going to talk today about iteration and how iteration in games has changed, and how we can possibly affect that change for the better. Why it's changed and what's changed within our industry. Mainly this change has been brought on by our old friend Hybrid working. And tell me if you can't hear me, because I don't really like working with a mic. I always think that the people that do talks, if you don't know about them, you don't really understand the context of what they're talking about, right? So I want to talk to you a little bit about me. I've been in games 25 years. I worked on, started on a team with Rare called Diddy Kong Racing, just for the last couple of weeks. Worked on a Star Fox game. Worked on NBA Street and FIFA Street at EA. But mainly started my work at a company called Rare. Very unusual company. They worked with small pods of teams rather than huge teams. So if you look at something like Electronic Arts at the time, we were working with teams of maybe 100, right? And that team would be broke into big sections. Where if you look at Rare, we were working with teams of just little tiny pods of 3-4 developers, right? And I think it's time maybe for that to come back, and that might solve some of the issues we have. What's my background? I'm a software engineer initially, although I was a chef before I got into games, which I always loved being a chef. Software engineer initially, and then moved on to project management and product and exec.
Hello, everyone.
And then back into product.
Just to let you know, in Sugar Hall A, there's a panel going on for establishing fast iteration cycles in a hybrid workplace.
So Cellbyte does.
So if you want to check it out, go over there now.
Live services for live games. Okay. On our section on Black Box, we work mainly with tools for developers. So a bit of a difference. Our end consumers, developers. So my day-to-day is trying to work out how do I make it easier for developers to develop games. And I always go back to, probably to Rare, all the way back to my initial company I ever worked with, because the way that they make games was really efficient. Small teams making exceptional games. Also a little bit about the type of person I am, because the type of person I am probably informs, the thought process I would have. So I'm what a lot of people in the games industry I think that I've met are very similar to this. Very hard-working, lazy people. I don't mean lazy in a bad way. We work incredibly hard, and then we take a break. This is what we do, right? You can't work at that level all the time. So that's what I do. And there's a very famous quote that supposedly Bill Gates said, but actually nobody could ever find that he said it, which is if you want to do a difficult job, if you have a difficult job, give it to somebody who's really lazy. And the reason for that is they'll find the easiest way to do it. That's what I do. Optimize down until it's the least amount of work I need to do to get the job done in an efficient and good way, right? And I think if you think of things like Niantic, when they first kicked off, Niantic were, if you remember what Niantic did a long time ago before they did Pokemon, what they were doing is they were getting lazy people to work out the quickest way to walk from A to B, right? And the quickest way may not be around the street. It may be through a back street. It may be over the top of a piece of land. So that's the type of thought process that I have. I'm really good at highly focused things. I'm really good at small teams. I'm really good at fast cadence. Right? What I'm really bad at is really slow cadence teams, huge teams, and projects that are all over the place. Right? I like to be focused. And I tend to find that most game developers are similar. And it does affect how we work within games. I'm going to move this because it's right in the way. So what else are we going to talk about today? Or what are the things you're really going to cover? How things were pre-pandemic, right? So pre-COVID or I'd like to put that out of the way. Pre-hybrid working, right? How things were, how things are now, and how things I think are going to change in the future, because there's going to be a vast change. I just want to say that game developers are incredibly devoted people, right? I've never met a games developer who wasn't totally passionate and devoted about the game they were working in. This isn't an industry where you can sort of just idly go into the corner and hide and do nothing for 10 years. You are at the forefront all the time. You're working hard all the time. And that's important because that, again, sort of influences how we work as groups, right? We tend to be people who we don't really need pushing to work hard. And in fact, often we need slowing down. We work too hard. We work too long. Right? So there's lots of different studies kicking about right now and over the last year or two about hybrid and how that's affected in particular games development, but the tech industry, or as I like to think of it, as a knowledge industry overall. And when people were asked in those studies if they were being more productive or less productive during hybrid or during working from home, at the beginning it was just work from home, then most of us developers said, yeah, we've been way more productive. How much more productive? Oh, I don't know, 70% more productive, right? But there's a sort of dichotomy there, because most of the leadership and management were saying, we are worried that actually there's been a negative impact on production and productivity, right? So if you've got the developers saying it's been positive, and management and leadership, not all of them, some of them, saying possibly it's been negative, there's some negative impact, then there's some unknowns there, there's some stuff we don't know. But also if you look at like studies out of, even things out of IGN and GDC, you'll see that games have been delayed more over the last 2 years than I can certainly remember over the last 25 years, right? The only time I remember games being delayed this much was when hardware was delayed, right? So they've been delayed, and so there must be something going on within games that's causing these delays, right? That's causing games to be delayed. And there must be something going on that's causing developers to say, hey, we are way more useful, we're 70% more useful, and leaders and managers saying, we're worried that we're actually negative impacted by remote working. Now, we said that games developers are really hard working, so we don't have to think that the developers are being lethargic, right? It's pointless. I've never met a games developer that's lethargic, right? That sits and does nothing all day. In fact, the opposite. Games developers that I know typically finished work at 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock or 5 o'clock, went home and worked even more, right? Either they trained themselves or they did research on the work they were going to do the next day, or they just worked if they had access, right? So it's got nothing to do with people being lazy or being lethargic. That's got nothing to do with it, because that's just not the people who come into this industry. There's other industries for that. When you listen to somebody like Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, he makes some really interesting points. Microsoft are making a huge change from the way they were, and if you remember their messaging at the beginning of work from home, right? It's very different to their messaging now, when they've learned things. And I think what they've done now is now they're at the forefront of saying, this is how work's going to be, and this is how we as a company are going to change to accommodate that work. Remember, at the beginning, a lot of companies were saying that, you know, we'll still be working 5 days a week in the office. As soon as COVID's over, you'll all come back. Things have changed. That's not going to happen. And people like Satya Nadella have noticed that. But I think that he's gone a bit deeper than that. And he's starting to talk about that when we do come back to work, even if that's part-time back in the office, or do come back to the office, that those office times will have changed as well, right? That when we're in the office, it's not going to be the same. We're not all going to be in our cubicles or our little desks, isolated from each other. Things will have changed. Meetings will have changed. So one point he's saying is this, you know, we'll need to accommodate these changes even in physical meetings. What will change in a physical meeting? Well, for instance, I'm sure you guys have all done your video meetings, right? Majority of video meetings I'm in, 12 different people in it with me, or 20 or 200. And most people, the artists, I can see them clicking. You know, they're moving pixels about, they're moving vertices about, they're building stuff while they're in the meeting. And the coders, I can see them typing the coding, right? I can see what they're doing. And we've given people the opportunity to do that real multitasking, right? Now, when we go back to the office and now you're sat in a meeting room with 5 or 6 or 12 people, you ain't going to be able to bring your desktop with you. You're not going to be able to be on Maya building things, right? So that's going to change. We may need to accommodate that, right? We may need to change the way we do meetings because of that. And this all sort of ties into this idea that iteration is key. It's king within games, my opinion. All the good companies I've worked for, and I have to say most of the companies I've worked for I've really loved, right? And have really got brilliant different production methods and development methods. But all the good ones I've worked for have known that iteration, the ability to change something, see the change, test it, consider it, and then change again, the faster you can do that, the better it is. It's like if you go to multiple restaurants, and I'm new to Toronto, so if I go to one restaurant in Toronto, there's not much chance that it's going to be one that I like. But if I go to 10 restaurants tonight and have a sample in each of them, much more chance that I'll find something that works for me, right? And iteration's very much the same. There's a new balance in work. And I'll tell you about my work. So I live in an open sort of loft thing like this in Vancouver. And there's me and my 2 cats and my fish and my wife, not in that order of importance. My wife and my daughter, my 11-year-old, she's an Apex Legends freak, so we play Apex Legends a lot. And you know, so it's a busy old place. How my life used to be was work-life balance. You remember 5, 10 years ago when we all started talking about work-life balance? It came out of a year, right? It used to be, I'll do some life in the morning. I'll take my kid to school. I'll work. And then I hope to have some life at the end of the day so I can go have a beer with friends, pizza, play board games with the family, go play soccer, go to the beach, all that type of thing, right? My work-life balance now is radically different, as you can see from the bottom line. My work-life balance is I actually do a little bit of work while I'm still in bed on the morning. The client doesn't know, but I'm on Slack like this talking to the client before I've even got up and got a coffee, right? Why? Why not? Huh? And then I get up and get a coffee, that's life. And then I take my little one to school, that's life. And then I come back and it's work. And then I go to the bank and it's life. And then I come back and it's work again. And what's happened with that is, and I love that, I have to say, that works for me, because remember when I was saying that I like flexibility, I like to be focused on things over short term. So for me, that totally works, and I think for a lot of people that works, especially people with families or lots of hobbies or commitments, that totally works. So we now have a system where we are interleaving work and life together to make that balance. However, our day is much longer than it used to be, right? The studies saying, when I talk about studies, the studies to look at, in my mind, some of the great studies to look at, Microsoft have done some brilliant work studies in 2020, 2021. GDC have done some great studies. There's a company called Humanize have done some brilliant studies, really like their stuff. Harvard Business Review's got some good studies and videos out there as well, right? So the studies that for me important are the ones that give you the facts. So it's a fact that our work, that people, developers, right, say that their work hasn't really changed, that they do 40 hours roundabout 40 hours, 45 hours a week of work. And I personally think that that's as much work as a normal human can do. Everything outside of that, you're not getting good value for money, right? You get worse and worse, you don't get any better, right? And if you think about it, it's like about a third of our week or something like that, right? But our days have gotten longer. So my day starts 8 o'clock. It might finish at 11. I love that. And a lot of people with kids and a lot of games developers who've got hobbies, and they're going to love that. But some others are not, right? Now, the clash comes when we come back to work in the office, because we're going to have a group of people who are quite happy with this much longer day. And we are going to have a group of people who actually want a much more compressed day. And how will we fix that imbalance between those two groups? So this new balance in work-life balance, or work, life, work balance, right? there's no clear demarcation between when it's work and when it's life. It used to be. Even if you worked longer hours, you still finished and then went home, right? Or wherever you went. And now you don't. Now you can be pedaling away on your Peloton while you're working, or you can be Peloton here and then over to your work desk here and then back on your Peloton, or whatever you do, right? It just blends between. So it's more difficult to actually say when you are working and when you're not working. And as knowledge workers, I'm sure, like, for me, knowledge workers, we're not robots. Our work is done here, right? We're using our hands to do the input-output, but the actual computation, right, is in our brains. You can be doing that while you're on your Peloton, no problem, right? You can be doing that while you're watching TV, with most TV. So there's not really a lot of definition to our days. And the other thing is we have mixed responsibilities, right? So now mixed responsibilities that I'm responsible for clients, but I'm also responsible to make sure my daughter goes to work and that types of things. What's all this got to do with iteration? Well, because it's affecting iteration. If we don't think about the people involved in games development and how this change will happen over the next sort of year or two, then we're going to miss out on how we can take advantage of that change and actually make it a positive rather than a negative. One of the other things with work from home is, one of the things I like is you get a view into other people's lives. Our only view before was you walk up to somebody's cubicle and you see that they've got figurines and they might have some football team on there or pictures of the family or that sort of little space when you went there. You certainly didn't get that in the meeting room. Now I can see people's cats jumping across behind them, knocking things over on the table, the kids running in and out screaming, the partner shouting, isn't it your time to do the pots, all that type of thing, right? So you get all that, you get the life, but you also see people dressed down, right? They're not going to do the hair every day when they come in and they're doing video meetings. You see them on a bad day and on a good day, right? And I think it's that empathy that that's a positive out of work from home and video. Now, a lot of people will turn the video off. I try to ask them to turn it on because it's our real true sort of link between other humans, right? So you guys as humans, you look at the eyes, right? I always look at people's eyes. You do that with an audience. It's difficult if we don't have that eye contact on video, right? Because it's the only thing we sort of have, right? But yeah, we get to see what their day-to-day is like. We get to see when they're busier, when they're more organized, and that type of thing. It's also worth bearing in mind that our work, whether we like it or not, and I like it, our work environment is our second family in effect, right? Certainly, most of my friends are work friends who I've met through work. I share things about my home life with my workers to try and help me do better at my home life and vice versa, right? So we rely on these people that we work with to actually help enrich our lives, not just our work lives, right? And again, it's different in some different industries, but in games, I've found that friendships last basically forever in games, right? I work with a guy, Phil, he's my GM. We worked our first ever game together on Star Fox 25 years ago, when we've kept our friendship all the way along, right? So I think it's those things that are important. And all this stuff brings us back to something else Satya Nadella said. He's not the only person in the world to say it, right? Which is, when you think about, or when you look at the studies that say that games development is certainly slowing down, that it has been impacted by work from home, which, you know, on the face of it seems weird anyway, because if people are no longer having to commute backwards and forwards, right? If they can sit there, if they can do the banking from home, if they can feed the cat, if when they don't feel great, they can still work, maybe they've just got a headache, whatever, we should be seeing more productivity, not less, right? So when we see this less productivity, then you need to study what it is that we're missing. And one of the things you said is that certain analog processes in game studios require co-presence. And the reason he said this, right, is because when they look at Microsoft as a whole, they notice that, yeah, there's been some advantages working from home. If we take away the fact that like loads of people are using Microsoft Teams, of course, and Zoom, for the Zoom company, of course, lots more people are using that, so that's beneficial to Microsoft and those companies. But what he's saying is the company within itself, as a group of developers, right? Some of Microsoft is getting more productivity, but he's saying that some, they're seeing less, and in particular, they're seeing that in games. So what's the difference between games and other tech or knowledge work, right, that's causing this differentiation of productivity due to work from home and hybrid? It must be something. What are these analog processes, right, that need this co-presence? And how are these affecting this iteration cycle? I would argue that looking at the studies and just looking at 25 years in games, that the majority of what we lose in is speed of iteration. So iteration, create, ideate and create, build, deploy, playtest, ideate and create, right? When we were at Rare, and we, on Black Box, the group that I work with, we've just started doing this again. We worked in, like I said, in pods. And the reason for that is our pod was semi-autonomous. It was responsible to itself. We typically had 1 or 2 artists, 1 or 2 programmers, and a designer. And we would do exactly that. We would create, build, deploy, playtest, create, build, maybe 20, 30, 40 times a day, right? Because we were all actually in the same cubicle, in the same little room together. And then there'd be another pod over here that'd work on a different level, and another pod over here that'd work on a different level, right? And it was super fast. And that's what brought that quality and speed, right? Being able to be so fast in those tight little pods, those tight little circles. And that's not easy to achieve when you, for various practical reasons, when you're either working from home or working remotely, or you're hybrid, or you're fully working back in the office. Because back in the office has changed, right? If we think that going back to the office, like hey, we're all going to work 5 days a week in the office like it used to be, it's going to be the same. It isn't going to be the same. Again, we're going to have to accommodate these new ways of working. Even for companies that go fully back to office are going to need to accommodate new ways of working, right? Nothing is going to be the same again. Video meetings are great, right? I mean, not my favorite thing. I like people. I've actually loved the fact that we can go about and talk to each other again now. This is great. Video meetings are great, but one of the things that this Nancy Abine said was when people trust each other and have social capital, you get a willingness to take risks. You get more innovation, creativity, and less groupthink. That's what those pods were at Rare. That's what we are trying to rebring, those pods, right? Small groups of people working autonomously. What you don't get in video meetings is that. Why? Well, because I don't know about you guys, but my video meetings have more people in them than I've ever had before, right? It used to be a meeting of 4, it's 12, or 50, or 30, or 200, right? Those video meetings do have some advantages, I guess. Like, they're less combative, right? We tend to be more pleasant in the video meetings. They're very slow. The gap between when I stop talking to allow other people to interject, I've had to make longer because of all that delay in the video and all that type of thing. I can't see the face often. Well, we say video meeting, but a lot of the time people are not actually on video. They're just doing voice, right? So they've got slower. These meetings have made us slower. We sit in the meeting for longer. The meetings have got longer. Most of our meetings used to be ad hoc. You know, you'd walk past and you'd see something and say, oh, wow, Mary, that looks fantastic. Like, show me that. I didn't see that in the... We go round and round and round. Okay, I've got to go because I've got... We don't do that anymore. We do... It's a meeting. It's going to be 30 minutes, right? How long do you think it'll take? Oh, about 17 minutes. Well, let's make it 30. Well, no, well, let's make it 40. Well, it may as well be an hour, right? And let's bring everybody in, right? So let's stop everybody, basically. Even though we can multitask, and there's the thing about it. How many more meetings are we having? Studies say 256%. I love it when you use percentages like that to make it sound massive, but it's still 2.5 times as many meetings as we used to. I don't know about you guys, but I already had enough meetings back in the old days 2 years ago, and now I've got 2.5 times as much. I haven't got a clue what we're going to get done. Now, when we go back to work in the office, we can't code while we're in the meeting. Can't do that anymore. So we're going to keep the 2.5 times as many meetings. I think that's going to have to disappear. We're going to have to deal with that differently. But in these modern meetings, definitely there's more patience, we're slower, but it is a difficult thing. It's difficult to get buy-in. Like, you've all been to hopefully seen comedy and a comedy show. You've been to a comedy club. I'm sure Toronto has some great comedy clubs, right? It's all about audience participation, right? It's all about being live, yeah? And to do that, you need to see the person. You need to see how they're sat. You need to see the body language. You need to see how the eyes are looking at you and the face. All those things are super important. We miss all that, right? It's difficult to get over a creative idea if you can't get buy-in. Iteration is built on creativity, right? So ideate and create, right? It's not just create, it's ideate and create. You need creativity, and you need to be able to sell that to your group. The bigger the group, the more difficult that is to do, right? Huge groups are almost impossible to sell to. I'd rather pick off one person, convince, next person, convince, or these two convince, then these two convince. It's a much easier way to do things, right? Or better still, convince these guys, right, who then help me convince these guys. That's what we used to do in these small pods at Rare, right? And that's what we're trying to do today. There's also another problem with this fantastic idea of unlimited meetings. We have unlimited meeting rooms. If you want to have a meeting now, you just start a new meeting. 2 years ago, if you want to have a meeting, you had to book the room, right? Now, when I was at EA, on our big floor with 100 people, it was 200, it was 2 teams, we had 4 meeting rooms. The meeting rooms are scheduled, so you had to, so you could only have a meeting a meeting room in one scheduled at once, right? And so you'd have to schedule it. So you could only have 4 meetings going on at once for 200 people. Everything else had to be ad hoc. Now today you can have 400 meetings if you want, right? And again, is that the cause of a slowdown in production in games? Maybe, because we're having 2.5 times more meetings, right? I don't know about you, but I've never actually got much done in a meeting. I've listened a lot. I've reached some agreements sometimes, but again, generally that's done outside the meeting, right? A separate meeting, a satellite meeting. So one thing that we might want to do is start to limit meetings, right? Rather than allow everybody to start a Zoom meeting with as many people as you want, right? Or whatever you're using, Google Chat, or whatever you're using to do that, then maybe we limit that. Maybe we say that there's only 3 meeting rooms, and that's all you can use, right? Whether you're remote or you're physical, right? That's all you can use, the 3. And then maybe we won't be having as many meetings. We can bring that back under control. So that's one of the things you could do. It's also worth thinking about, or I think a lot about, and this is the type of thing that just goes through my head like every week when I'm like thinking about work and dev, and hoping that the people who are younger than crusty old me, right, that are coming into this industry are thinking of the new ideas and not laying on the old ideas and keeping with them, right? But we back in the day, everything was synchronous. And now you want to do everything asynchronously. In code, everything wants to be asynchronous, right? For instance, if you don't, we want to download something on our browser, and while we're downloading, we still want to be browsing other stuff on a different tab, right? We want it to be asynchronous, right? I want to download, if I'm lucky, on Xbox, a game, the next game I want to play while I'm playing this game, right? I want it to do it now. So sort of asynchronous. And I think, that's, again, how we used to meet, sort of asynchronously. We would sort of leave notes to each other, we'd bump into each other, we'd synchronize for small amounts of time, and then go off and think. And now we meet in a very synchronous manner. Everybody must be there at once. You all must attend the meeting, right? And as coders, that's slow. I mean, that's not the way to do things. Asynchronous is definitely the way to do things. And if we go back and we look at how my day looks and how a lot of people's days look now with that work life across the day rather than, life, work, life, we've interleaved. Again, that's an asynchronous way to work. That is the future. That is where we go. So we have to think about, like, where do we meet, how do we meet, who do we meet with, and start thinking about it as going back to this idea of asynchronous, right? What are the hidden benefits of Zoom Power? We talked about this. You can just lurk in the meeting, right? You can ghost the meeting, you can lurk in the meeting, you can be like, I'm typing, are you there, Mary? Yes, I am, but actually I'm coding some really important back-end stuff, so I'm not really listening, I'm just here, right? You may as well not be there, really. But we bring them in, why? Because it's dead easy. 2 years ago, to get all you guys in a meeting, I had to go, can you be in the meeting? Can you be in the meeting? You can't. Well, can we do whatever? And then when the meeting kicked off, only half of you are there. I'm running around the floor bringing everybody else into the meeting, right? This is how it really, really is. Now you don't do that. Now it's just you click the button, come to the meeting, you're there, you have to be there, right? So again, that's all sort of changed. And meeting etiquette, I think, is going to change. So I don't think people are going to give up this ability to multitask, right? This ability that I can check on my build, right? How's that going while I'm sat in the meeting? I'll still come to the meeting in case anybody asks about back-end stuff, right? Or whatever it is, or matchmaking. I'll still come to the meeting, but I can't bring my desktop. I wish I could. On a trolley, that would be fantastic. But I still need to know what's going on. I still want to keep this productivity going. So I think there's going to be some changes there. I think actually our mobile phones are going to become even more important. I can see builds getting fired from mobile phones. I can see all that type of sort of ancillary work getting done back on our mobile phones. I think the days of, hey, John, can you not be on the phone during the meeting? They've probably gone, right? Because we don't want to lose that. Yeah? I know when I was at EA, it was very much no for you to type. You had to say, oh, actually, I'm typing up the meeting notes. You couldn't be typing to somebody else. That was a no-no, right? And I mean, that's just how it was, but that's got to change, right? We still need to do that. I want to take the benefits that make us faster to iterate, right? That we've learned over the last 2 years and not lose the benefits, but I want to lose the disadvantages for sure. If you read a lot of the studies, they go on a lot about the same thing. Strong ties and weak ties, or strong bonds and weak bonds. What's a strong bond? Like our strong ties, our strong bonds, we've done better at. So let's say the four of us are a pod, right? We've actually done better working from home. We've done better in a remote and hybrid environment. We get stronger. We meet more together, right? We pass on information together better. We become sort of self-authorized, self-reliant, self-motivated. We push each other. That's become better, right? However, if that's become better, then why is games development slowing down? Right? There must be a reason why games development is slowing down. So then that's not, that iteration maybe is working, but what we've lost when we've gained this 26% more ties, right, is we've lost the weak links, the weak ties. So what are the weak ties? So if we are one department working on one part of the game, we might not necessarily anymore talk to this department working on a different part of the game as much as we used to. Why? Yeah, because we're not at the coffee machine. There's no coffee machine to bump into each other. Hey, John, what are you doing with that thing with the... Oh, no, yeah, really? That's gone. We don't do that anymore. Now, we've tried that at a Cellbite. I'm sure all you guys have done the same. We've got, like, Slack channels where you can just go in and just have a laugh and talk. They don't really get used. They do for the first week, but people just, it's not the same as meeting a person in front of the coffee machine, right? You want to break from seeing the same people. You actually go to the coffee machine, not just for coffee. You go to the coffee machine or the water cooler because you want to bump into a new face and you want to talk, because that's what we are, we humans, right? So we're missing that. So therefore, then that's probably something that's really important to do with iteration. And I think what that is it's an external feedback loop that we're missing, right? We've got the internal feedback loop within this pod, but we're missing external feedback loops. And we talk about that just a little bit later, not too later. How do they work out? How do they work out the 26% more ties? Well, they're just tracking tangible assets, right? So they're doing a lot of different things. We can imagine if I track, how much time do we talk on Slack with each other? But we always used to talk on Slack with each other, but we're talking 10 times more. Okay, so that's our ties are getting stronger. We rarely talked on Slack to each other, once every month, but now it's gone to once every 6 weeks or once every 8 weeks. Okay, so that weak link has got weaker. Okay. So one thing I was trying to employ you to do, whether you guys are employers, and I hate both these words because I always feel that games is just about a load of people that make games. I mean, it's really, most of the bosses I've worked, and I've been a boss, but I'm sure you guys either have or will be, are actually just crazy about games. I'm crazy about games. I'm 56 and I'm still crazy about games, right? And I think that one of the things that's important is that we continue to listen to the whole group, right? And I think that's missing. I think we're missing that. What we're not asking, I would say 3 key questions that we could ask ourselves. And when I say ask ourselves, everybody, from the CEO, ask her, down to the QA just came out of university, right? The 3 questions I would ask, really the main question I would ask is, what do you fear most about if you were given the choice to either fully work from home, to be fully office-centric, or to work hybrid? What would you be worried about the most? What would you be worried about the most? Communication links. And yourself, sir, what would you be worried about the most? Yeah. Or if you were asked, let's say your team turned around and said, we're not going to go hybrid. We are fully working 5 days a week.
I don't know. I feel like my team right now, we just finished a game more or less. Like we did that sort of only online sort of work, and we were able to communicate a lot because like you send a message to someone and like you can get them on stuff. So I feel like there'd be kind of maybe a slower turnaround for this thing.
If you went fully back, if you had to go fully back to an office. Yeah. And I really think that it's much more likely that we won't go fully back to the office. I don't know anybody who's saying that. I mean, there's the odd anomaly that's saying that. And there's nothing wrong with that, but I don't know many who are saying we're going fully back to the office 5 days a week, right? I just don't see that happening because the type of people that we are in games, we like a lot of choice. We like a lot of freedom of thought. We're a bit rebels, right? A little, to be honest. I mean, so I don't think we're going to go for that. I don't think we're going to be able to all work from home all the time. So I think the obvious answer is we're going to be hybrid. A bit of both. What we've got to make sure is that bit of both isn't the worst of both. It's the best of both. Right? So I would say that, one of the things that I'm not seeing a lot of companies do is actually ask everybody from our CEO all the way down to our QA, what do you think about going back to work? About office? What would you think about if we didn't? What would you think about if we went hybrid? One of the biggest changes that you guys are going to come over, and this is going to affect iteration, because iteration loops work really well because we all know each other really well, right? We know each other in our little pod, so that's great, that's fast. We also bump into each other at the coffee machine, so our pod can talk to their pod, so that's really good. But we're going to have a big issue, and the issue is going to be retention. Right? Retention is going to be huge. It already is right now. Why? Just talking to a friend of mine today, just on the corridor there. Imagine if I'm in Vancouver. Luckily in Vancouver, there's a lot of games companies, right? There's like 20, right? There's like 5 or 6 big ones. There's probably way more than 20 if you count the smaller ones, but there's 20 decent-sized ones, or game-related companies like Unity and such like that, right? So let's say that's 1% or 2% or 5% of the games market that I could go and work for, right? But now I can work for all of the games market, basically. I can probably work for about 75% of the games market. I could work for a company in Singapore, no problem, right? Anywhere, I could work for a company in Japan. Oh my gosh, I could work for Nintendo, my dream, right? I'd probably go to Japan, to be honest, because I love it. But I could. So retention, however people look at it, is going to be a huge issue. Why is that going to affect the iteration? Yeah, because our pod, our friend here, is going to Nintendo, not working with us anymore. Now the pod breaks down. We have to start again. We have to build a better pod. Or our guy we used to meet at the coffee on the coffee machine on the other pod, off go and do something else. Right? That's going to be a huge impact to us. What are the sort of practical things it'll impact? So we get like the last couple of slides are just about what are the practical implementation. What are the things that we're thinking about right now in my team, in my group? And again, our two of us, we've worked together 25 years in games, not always together. We had our first job in games ever, first day in the office together. We'll probably have our last job in games ever, me and my friend Phil, he's our GM, right? And this is what we think about all the time. We don't work directly in games, we're indirectly related, but we think about games and games development. Always, 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 and how to make it easier to get the most, creativity out. But the really practical things that I worry about, that we're not looking at, is that retention causes other issues, right? Internal tools, for instance. So if you are using an internal tool, now I've been on teams where we've used no internal tools, right? And I've been on teams where we've written everything. It was a game, the company I started called Action Pants. It later became Ubisoft Vancouver, where we basically started from a clean, an empty text file. That was our beginnings. We had nothing, right? And I wanted to build all my own tools. And that was okay then, but now it's going to be different, because if retention causes turnover within the industry, which it will, let's say it causes 15% more turnover, I think that would be a conservative number, right? Then who's going to onboard people to those internal tools? You're going to have more, that's 15% more onboarding, right? It's fine if they're using Maya, and we use Maya, that's fine. But the internal tools, the smaller bits, the pieces of the pipeline, right? That's going to become difficult. You've got to onboard them all. Who's going to keep that running and support it? Is it going to be, if that person goes, are you going to be able to get them back in? In days of like really heavy turnover, where retention's an issue, how are we going to replace those people? Because even that's going to be difficult. Where are we going to get our tool developers? Let's be fair. Tool developers are probably, especially audio tool developers, the most difficult people to hire in the world, I think, in games. It's just super difficult. They're really dedicated and they're brilliant at what they do, right? Difficult. If those people start turning over, and I hate to say it, but it will happen, right? That's the freedom that we've got now. Then it's going to be difficult to replace them, right? Especially if that's an internal tool that's specific to your team or your company. So the great reshuffle, as it's called, nicely called, is going to have problems. Other practicalities, talking to a company just the other day, and we talked about this, we were thinking about this last year, right? So 150 staff, let's say that you've got 150 staff, or 200, or 50 even, all sat at home, right? Most of them right now, on what? Like I've got a 1 gig. There's a 1 gig pipe on my internet, right? You guys are probably 1 gig, or you're 0.5. If you're on fiber, you're 1 gig, or you're 0.5 of a gig, something like that, right? So you're uploading and downloading all day, right? So 150 people times a gig, 150 gig, right? And when you get back to the office, you're going to have a 10 gig pipe, right? Or a 1 gig pipe, or a 2 gig pipe. And you're going to saturate that pipe immediately, which is going to slow down our iteration process, right? Because if you've decided we're going to build in the cloud, because it's great for remote workers, but now we're in the office, right? That doesn't work the same. You've now got to upload and download games. How big's a game currently? I don't know, like 50 to 70 gig for a console game, right? Easy. For a Windows Unreal game, 70 odd gig is easy. 100 gig, probably within a year, right? You got to upload and download. How many builds are you making a day? I know teams that are making 1 build a week. I know teams that are making 100 builds a day. If it's automated, it's easy, right? When everybody was at home and everybody had a fat pipe to send it all down to, easy. Now, difficult. A practical thing that you can look at to try and sort of keep that speed of iteration going. Think of all the things that you took for granted. You can't take them for granted. And it's not just that we are going back to work in the office. So if we all went back to work in the office 100%, it would be actually be okay. We could bring stuff back into the office. But that isn't going to be how it is. It's going to be hybrid, which means probably mean twice as much bandwidth. My AWS costs or Azure costs are going to be probably twice for transfer. Why? Because I want to build at home that I can play, and I want to build at work that I can play as well. Right? I want the whole project at home, and I want the whole project at work. And if that project gets updated I want it all at home. It's just going to become super, super difficult. So hybrid actually means that both of our up and down costs are expensive because we're pushing stuff out of the studio to home a lot more than we were. And we're pushing stuff from home to the studio, obviously, just as much as we were. So again, we talked about this a little bit earlier, but another practicality. What are you doing to get these 256% more meetings in your office space? Again, when you look at what Microsoft have just recently, within the last month, have said they're doing is they're radically reorganizing their floor space, right? Radically reorganizing it so that you can have more ad hoc meetings. And they're not reorganizing it in a way where you have meetings, huge amounts of people, like we'll have bigger meeting rooms. We'll have lots more ad hoc spaces. They want to build those weak links, those weak ties. So you might want to look at that. And if you guys are running your own company, then you want to look at it yourself. And if you're working for somebody else, you want to be bugging them and saying, we should be thinking about this. What's the plan, Stan? You know, what are we going to do about this when we get back in? Who's on top of this? Who's running it? Who's pushing it? You're still going to need, even if we only work in 3 days in the office, I think this is what most companies will run for, 3 days, you're still going to need exactly the same amount of licenses, but you're going to need them at home and at work, so that's twice as many. The same amount of coffee machines, right? Because at any given day, you're going to have a full office. You're going to need the same office space, because on a Wednesday, probably everybody's going to work, right? So there's no savings to be had from hybrid, right? And because you want your mainstay, your team in the office at the same time. Why do you want the mainstay, the team in the office at the same time? Because that's the way that we're going to keep iteration fast. So, what would I say are some of the key things that we could probably do then to sort of take advantage of this hybrid sort of working? I really do think the pods are key. Because pods can be self-organizing, right? In given the right level of autonomy, not full autonomy, but the right level of autonomy, the right level of responsibility, then pods can really organize themselves in this hybrid work environment, right? So as a pod, we could say if there's in the summer, there might be the beach that we can go and work at as a pod. And just as efficient to when I'm talking about we doing these ideate and create sessions, right? The things where it really matters that we talking people to people, where you can see body language, right? We can do them. We can decide if we have a pod that we are co-located around a certain suburb, we can meet at a coffee shop at a certain suburb, or we can meet in a park, or somebody's basement or something like that, right? All those things pods can do. And they can also turn up at work, right, in the office and do the same thing as well. So I think that pods and self-sufficiency, self-organizers, what does self-sufficiency mean? Well, I don't know about you guys, but I relied on IT and I relied on build engineers a lot, right? So anything that needed to be done, I'm bugging the build engineer, right? It's going to be more difficult to do that because if we have these pods, we want the pods to sort of be able to do a lot of that work themselves. So I think one of the key areas that we're looking at is to make these mini tools to allow them to be tech level agnostic, right? So that anybody can make a build. Anybody. Anybody can deploy that build anywhere in the world. Anybody can spin up a server to play that build on. Anybody can play test it. Anybody can feedback, right? That's what we're trying to do. So you take out that slowness out of that iteration loop. I don't think there's any like super fast fixes to iteration, unfortunately. I'm sorry, right? I think it's more like a bike. So you've got your pedal bike, right? And to make that pedal bike really perfect, if you're really freaky about pedal bikes, you're going to oil every part of it or use some special lubrication on it. It's going to be super smooth to ride. It's going to be super fast, super efficient, feel good, right? In iterations like that, it's going to be lots of small things that we need to change, right? Like silly things like, what are we going to do about uploading and downloading builds that are huge? We need to change all those type of things. How do we get this humanity back into our meetings, right? Another small thing, it's not a huge thing, it's a small thing, right? It's going to need all those small things. I'm going to quickly go through, like, I talked about iteration cycle. What does the iteration cycle look like for me? Ideate and create, build, deploy, peer test. That's what we did at Rare. And actually that's what we are implementing within our small group. We are using shape up technique, right? Which I think is great, right? So, so we go through this idea, build, deploy, and create. And we want that to be as fast as possible. We want to grease that wheel as much as possible. Autonomous teams, we're working with tools that are familiar. I think one of the big areas that I see that's going to be really changed to games is any type of product that relies on pixel streaming. So, for instance, or whatever we want to call that technology, there's many words to name it. But there's a company just across the back street from me. There's I think 300 staff now, 250 staff, and they're using pixel streaming for everything. So they use Teradata for everything, right? And I think that's huge because it means we can log into our machine at work and get back exactly the color-corrected view of that machine. It means everything's exactly the same. We don't have to set it up twice. We don't have to have 2 lots of IT. We don't have to have 2 licenses. I think that's going to be huge, pixel stream, and especially for player testing, right? Because if you pixel stream, you don't necessarily have to download. If I want to initially test a game, I want to test it through pixel streaming first because I don't have to download it. That's just saved me 10 minutes. A typical download at full AWS speed is going to be about 10 minutes for a 50 gig game, right? If you've got a 1 gig pipe, right? So I can get rid of 10 minutes and get back to my pod and say, hey, let's try that, didn't work, let's try this again. And then when I get a good build, then I can download that build. We talked about pods meeting physically in an office. I can say I've only got 1 minute and 16 seconds left, and I've only got a couple of slides left. Build processes that are fast. This is something we really want to try and fix. And we're not talking about parallel building, but building only what needs to be built. That's what we are looking at this year. What actually needs to be built rather than press build. Press build and we have to build everything. Anyone can build. Deploy. Deploying a build, we want to deploy a build as fast as possible. Fastest way to deploy a build, don't deploy it, pixel stream it. That is the fastest way. Second fastest way, don't deploy a full build, deploy just what's changed. Now that's not the same as a patch. Patches don't work when you've got hundreds of different builds kicking about, right? So what we are doing is we are just deploying the actual files in Unreal that have changed, and then rebuilding that on the far side, right? We haven't solved that yet, right? But as a group, you guys want to be thinking about how do you solve that, right? And make things tech level agnostic, for sure, right? Again, to do with retention. And then the last thing, that player test. We want anybody to run a player test, and we want a server to be able to go, I want to send this to the server, I want to send the client out, and I want to be able to play, yeah? Think about all those things to try and speed up your iteration. Thanks a lot. It's been a pleasure. Enjoy being in games. I love games.